America's most influential education philosopher, John Dewey has changed the way our country views the classroom. Amidst an era of social reform, the monotonous repetition of multiplication tables has been replaced by Dewey's own theories of hands-on education, wherein the student becomes an active part of their learning rather than a passive receptor of hard facts. Despite pushback from politicians, elites, philosophers alike, Dewey was able to break through and redefine American education. In the late 19th century, the average American school saw most children attend for only a few years before joining the workforce. Inside the classroom, teachers stuck tightly to the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Oftentimes, this resulted in rote memorization and repetition of math facts or classic literature. At the turn of the century, the ideas of education politician Horace Mann laid the groundwork for standardization of curriculum, placing emphasis on fact-based tests. In the meantime, the progressive era was taking hold. Figureheads such as Teddy Roosevelt and Jane Addams led a movement towards social reform to account for the influx of immigrants and low-income populations in growing industrial cities. In the midst of the progressive era, an education revolution was taking rise. The same year Mann died, in 1859, a new thinker took his place, John Dewey.
So, the way that I understand Dewey is as both a philosopher and a pedagogue. But mostly, what I admire is his philosophy of education. And he says that the aim of education is to make this a better democracy. And the way that we do that is through having students, learners, work in social groups to solve, quote-unquote, real-world problems.
John Dewey's work, Democracy and Education, published in 1916, is the accumulation of his theories on schooling. Dewey emphasizes the value intrinsically motivated learning can have towards creating well-educated and hardworking citizens. To create this desire to learn, Dewey sought to involve students in their learning directly. Doing so develops an identity of interest, which motivates students to experience in more depth the work that is important to them. The teacher's role in Dewey's classroom would be as a guide, intermediate in learning, not final. Teachers should aid students to develop in their own interests outside of a universal curriculum, lest both teacher and student become slavish to the system. In 1894, Dewey opened the Chicago Laboratory School, bringing his theories to life as students followed their own impulses and interests by experimenting and reflecting. Dewey's work immediately attracted criticism. The efficiency movement focused on education as a factor in Frederick Taylor's scientifically managed capitalism, which attempts to quantify usefulness of assembly line workers as the backbone of the economic growth of the Roaring Twenties. Useful value, Dewey says, should come second to appreciative value, allowing growth of citizens as naturally inquisitive rather than compliant.
There was a lot of pushback by the essentialists who felt that progressive education was too child-centered and we needed to get back to basics.
Despite Dewey's belief of equality in education, essentialist ideals would continue to foster inequality as institutional racism and gender-specific career tracks subsisted throughout the 20th century. Despite criticism at the time, John Dewey is now hailed as the most influential education philosopher of the 20th century. His idea of learning by doing slowly made its way into the modern teacher's classroom in a variety of ways.
How I would describe my teaching style, sort of community-based. I want ideally class to feel like an experience. So it's not the fill the bucket model of I have the content and I'm delivering it to you, the student, so much as we are investigating things together. So I do a lot of things to try to draw on my students' lives and their opinions and the actual world around us so that the classroom feels like a place that's more connected and not something that's sort of cut off from the rest of the world.
For example, the field trip is now a standard method of education and can be traced back to Dewey's time at the Chicago Laboratory School. Since then, the idea of the class excursion has been on the rise, allowing students to build new experiences and discover personal interests. Vital to the building of interest is the idea of play. As Dewey considered it, play is merely the spirit of work without the desire for a result. As such, he emphasized play as imperative to the developing child's mind. Since Dewey's era, many kindergarten classes have integrated play into everyday activities to spark the inquisitive spirit of children. Dewey's idea of learning by doing does not stop at the elementary level. In the 1940s, the highly interactive audio-lingual learning method emerged and has since developed into the language laboratory required at most universities.
A hands-on English classroom to me is a place where the reading and the writing matter and feel like not another thing to check the box for.
Curricula relevant to student lives are becoming more mainstream in the 21st century. Multicultural literature in the English classroom is becoming more prevalent to expand students' worldviews. Nationwide pleas for required civics education and the revitalization of home economics have resulted in their addition to many statewide curricula. All three were offered at Dewey's laboratory school from a young age, as Dewey sought real-life experience in education. In an increasingly digital age, many teachers are utilizing technology as a form of kinesthetic learning to draw interest in youth, opening the eyes of many to the possibility of new occupations in a constantly evolving world, following the advice of Dewey.
We must prepare our children not for the world of the past, but for their world, the world of the future.
In 1987, a study by Greeno et al. Determined that a complex environment during adolescence is pivotal in the development of an inquisitive mind, and has since been a basis for child development studies, causing the role of students in the classroom to shift, as seen in the complex instruction classroom as well as in the flipped classroom. The complex instruction classroom creates a social environment wherein students take on different roles, including leadership and organization. This method is based on Dewey's theory of plasticity, or the power to learn from experience, which is at its height during young adolescence. Likewise, the flipped classroom revolves around the student's natural inquisitivity.
The idea is that the content is delivered at home. So like for a math or science teacher, there might be videos or PowerPoints or lectures, and then you come in and you're applying the content, and you're applying it and working through it and, working on the problems in a more kind of social and interactive way that the teacher can support you with.
Outside of the traditional curricula of the 3 R's, Dewey often focused on building more valuable traits, like personal morals and critical thinking skills. Values clarification, often seen in the complex instruction classroom, is a method of teaching that allows students to be leaders in their own school society in order to establish their own moral compass. In 1983, a report titled "A Nation at Risk" criticized the American education system for being behind that of other countries. Among its critiques was a lack of higher-level thinking in adolescence. Consequently, new programs like Eureka Math and Tactics for Thinking aim to improve the students' problem-solving skills across the curriculum, as Dewey suggested. A Nation at Risk didn't just critique critical thinking. It also led to the implementation of hundreds of standardized tests and ultimately the No Child Left Behind Act.
I'm hoping we're at the turning point because we've gone so far to the conservative, essentialist side of things for the past, almost 40 years or something.
Despite countless steps towards Dewey's ideal classroom, American education has never achieved the flexibility to truly develop the mind of a child the way Dewey intended. Ideologically, he was able to tear down the barriers separating child from teacher and school from society. Yet, No Child Left Behind pushed aside all progress in favor of easily quantifiable ways to judge teacher and student improvement from a bare-bones, curriculum-based system. From his book Schools of Tomorrow, John Dewey's entire philosophy revolves around one line: education that associates learning with doing will replace the passive education of imparting the learning of others. Many still hold out hope. Dewey still holds the title of the most influential education philosopher in American history. His ideals may not be seen in the current workings of education policy, but they live on in the underlying methodologies of the modern teacher.
There's a real lack of understanding of what that would really mean for our schools and how revolutionary it would be if we actually committed to that as a foundational principle.